Hello everyone, RP, good morning, good to see you. So guys, another episode again. Now my working days have actually started, so I don't have that much time in comparison to last week where I had all the time in the world just to work on PlaneMaker and on developing our very cool Skyhawk 172S. So from now on, for several months, I'm just going to stream around this time for several days per week, not that much. Still work is primary here, my full-time job there. So hey, that's just my reality. Anyways, I'm trying to create as much time as I can to keep this development process going. So I really appreciate your support here and suggestions and stuff, because that really fuels my development mindset too. Morning, good to see you. Good morning. Well, no, RP said good morning, so I returned the favor. Now, actually, now here in the Netherlands, it's just after dinner time. So, yeah. All right, guys. So, PlaneMaker, FilmMaker, and we talked with Rush last time. Let me first put on some music. So, just to wrap up again, what have we learned? Well, several things actually. First off, it's not that FilmMaker is the primary application that really solely, primarily determines our flight performance of our Skyhawk. It does calculate in a lot of stuff that we need to be concerned of. For example, the lift coefficient and the drag in terms of the airfoil. But also PlaneMaker plays as much into how our Skyhawk handles in terms of drag and all kinds of other stuff. So I'm glad that we put some care into developing our Skyhawk here, even though what X-Plane is not doing is really determining all of the air flowing around this entire model and doing really proper, quite sophisticated calculations that really, well, the advanced academic flight model applications would do. So it's still quite simplified, but then again, I've also read a couple of articles by others who've been using PlaneMaker and also X-Plane that is actually really closely approaching flight realism. So that's really good to hear. Anyways, we currently mostly just build a Skyhawk that looks like a Skyhawk, and we also made some control surfaces that work. But based off of what Rush was pointing me towards, is that a lot of stuff that actually defines how our Skyhawk flies is not so much just objective numbers that we can find in manuals, but it's actually test flying the aircraft. And based on how the thing performs, given our model and given our airfoil, we can then change and modify to get as close to a really realistic flying Skyhawk flying in X-Plane, which was a good reminder or a good pointer, because I was really very focused, blindly focused on just getting those numbers in. But even if we put in the right numbers in PlaneMaker, X-Plane is not perfect. PlaneMaker is also not perfect, and so even though we got a Skyhawk that mostly matches the right numbers and dimensions, if it does not fly like a Skyhawk, if it does not feel like a Skyhawk in X-Plane, well, what are we doing, right? That's my ultimate goal, to create a Skyhawk that feels and flies like a Skyhawk. So perhaps that also explains why FilmMaker did a lot of other stuff with the slats and bigger chord size of the flaps and stuff. Even though it looks quite unrealistic and weird, perhaps those modifications on PlaneMaker side do provide a much more realistic flight handling of the Skyhawk when you load up the Airflow Labs 172. So that was a good reminder. Also, that actually spurred me on to look a little bit more into test flying. And man, that's an interesting branch of being a pilot. I thought actually that being a test flight did not involve any much additional training, and that it was more like stepping into a plane and, well, gradually earning some recognition by the flight community, aviation community, rather than it being a formal title. There are actually test pilot schools. I didn't know about that. So I've been looking for a lot of documentation on how to do proper test flights. primarily also because we need those. It's not just about creating an aircraft in PlaneMaker and take off and say, hey, we got an aircraft, and then we move on to our next stage of development here, photoshopping and Blender. But actually test flying becomes an integral part of optimizing our Skyhawk. So yeah, Rush made me aware that I should actually pay a lot more attention to that, much more care into that stuff. So I've been looking at already some PDFs and guides on how to do proper test flights, also for real-world pilots that are building their own experimental aircraft that also need to test fly their aircraft, right? And a little bit in contrast to what Rush was suggesting, what he is doing actually in X-Plane, also just for the benefits that X-Plane provides, it's not so much a trial and error kind of organic kind of way of testing your aircraft, but actually in the real-world test flying sticks to a quite rigid, quite strict, structured way of doing proper test flights. So I'm not going to start like Rush suggests just with flying and doing stalls, but I like to follow pretty close to the same protocol that actual real-world test pilots follow to test fly their aircraft, and based off of that do modifications on the airframe and the engine and stuff to make it right. So that's an important change, or different direction, I would say, and would also make that test flying bit a little bit more substantive as part of these vlog series. So I think that's really interesting. So I'm still studying. Also on YouTube there are a lot of interesting documentaries on test flights. Not so much that they provide really procedural information on how to do those, but more like background information on what test pilots are, how those test pilot schools work, and what they look for as being proper test pilots. And well, through watching those, I've already seen several hours of those documentaries, it becomes quite clear that being a test pilot is quite challenging, also quite rewarding, but man, a lot of study, I mean, significant study into aerodynamics, and indeed the whole challenge that I also mentioned to Rush. The biggest challenge, or the biggest task of a test pilot is not just does it fly, also not can the test pilot nicely take off and land with that airplane, but mostly does the airplane do what it's supposed to do given its physical appearance and stuff and design criteria, and if not, what things need to be changed in order to make it right. And especially the latter is very challenging. So imagine just doing we're taking off with our Skyhawk or making a bank, a roll, and we notice that there's something off. Well, that there's something off is much too generic to infer what we need to change of the Skyhawk to make it fly properly. Perhaps we need to change the airflow of the propeller. Perhaps we need to change the surface of the wing. Perhaps we need to... There are 1,000 variables that we can look at. And as Russ suggests, well, it just comes down to knowledge and experience, to how efficiently we can go through all of these test flights and make our Skyhawk fly like it should. And even though I'm a quite experienced sim pilot with the Skyhawk, I'm not an aircraft engineer at all, so I cannot really that easily still translate flight performance into aircraft design variables. And that's the big challenge, and that's also what the test pilot schools revolve around. Is just to provide experienced pilots with a really fundamental, intuitive understanding of what actual flight or what aerodynamics is all about, and so they can fly and have a structured way of doing flights, gathering data on their aircraft, and then using that data to do recommendations on how to improve stuff. So it's a really systematic, inquiry-driven way of flying, and that really excites me. And also, well, involves a lot more than I initially thought. I thought it was kind of like a celebration flight almost, like, okay, we did all the settings, we did all the data, and now we fly and say, oh, we got a Cessna, and then we move on. But no, it's actually a very integral, important part of the development process. So yeah, we're gonna dedicate a lot of upcoming episodes, to doing proper test flights, and I would like to do it by the book. There are not that many books that I found yet, but I did find some guides and some exercises that we should do with our Skyhawk to systematically test our Skyhawk and optimize it. So I think that's really cool. RP, I have a test flight program manual for experimental if you would like it. Oh, absolutely, RP, send it. tim@uncertifiedpilot.com if you please. I would love to get my hands on any manuals that are about test flying. because it's quite difficult stuff. And also, even though I got those manuals, it still doesn't provide you with that much of a solution if you don't understand aerodynamics, right? You can follow up on a particular stall maneuver to find out whether these stall speeds are right, but if you can not really then interpret that flight performance in terms of aerodynamics, well, yeah, it's a nice exercise, you got a nice guide, but yeah, you still need to tinker with your Skyhawk model or numbers. So I still need to study a lot more. So I've also ordered some books on aerodynamics to also be a little bit more knowledgeable on that front, so we can make sensible modifications rather than just fiddling with some variables and then finding stuff out. So yeah, it's going to be even a more steeper learning curve, guys, but I think that's cool. So that's generally what's going through my mind that I've been doing in the meanwhile. So today what I'd like to do, and that's also for the remaining episodes, I guess, for this week, is we're gonna leave Airfoil Maker, even though it looks cool, and I initially thought that now we should do all of this stuff, because for two reasons. One, the most primary one that I just mentioned. This stuff comes in later when we're going to do our test flights, and based off how our Skyhawk flies, we are going to we're going to mess up the airfoil to make it approach a real-world flying Skyhawk 172 SP. That's the idea, at least. So this is going to be a tool that we're going to really use alongside our test flights. So gone and away. Therefore, because those test flights are so important, we need to get our Skyhawk airworthy. We need to get flying as quickly as possible. So what I'm going to do instead of messing with Airfoil Maker is to put in numbers, so it's actually able to fly, that we can boot it up in X-Plane. We can already boot it up, but it has no working engine, even though we got a prop turning here. We didn't set any RPMs, max RPMs, or a lot of other stuff that I'm also still quite unfamiliar with. So that's what we're going to do starting from today. We're going to make it a Skyhawk that we can actually fly. And once we can do that, we're going to start with that test flying chapter. So that's the idea. So if I look at my notes here, yeah, make the plane flyable. That's the general idea of what we're going to do. This next episode about the wings and the airfoil, that's not current anymore. So I think that my next episode is going to revolve around a lot of other stuff. To make that an airworthy kind of Skyhawk. So, yeah, I was thinking about where we could start then. Maybe also get some chill music on. Chill station, well, it's on actually. Okay, didn't sound like chill. So there's a lot of stuff that we still need to do in order to make the Skyhawk fly. We could start with the engine, put in some numbers there. We could also start with drag coefficients for the fuselage, for the miscellaneous bodies that we put in. We also need to set the nose wheel so that we can actually taxi, steer on the ground. So yeah, a lot of stuff that we need to account for. Good evening, Azen. Good to see you. So I don't know quite where we should start with. I would say, well, we started with making the fuselage, so we'd also start with the fuselage itself. Now, we already made a nice structure here. One thing that's related to this is making the wings, the airfoil, nicely fitting to the cabin. Now, as I already mentioned in the previous stream, I already kind of did. If we zoom in, you can see the wings, well, very nicely fit the cabin here, the curve here, which is just great. And I noticed with Airfoil Maker, the visual representation of the airfoil has nothing to do with how X-Plane interpret the aerodynamics for that airfoil. It's just the numbers that do the job. So Yeah, I think we can just keep the wings as they are, because they would only very, very slightly differ from what the actual Skyhawk wings look like. And we have no pictures, we have no real degrees or numbers that we can put in or stuff to make it as fitting as possible. So it's the Airfoil 2412. That's the one that is used by the Skyhawk. And it's fitting now with the fuselage, so I think that's a good check. It looks great. So, good to see you as well. 1, engine specs. 2, weight and balance control geometry. Roger. We'll also need to do some drag stuff. Also with the flaps and timings. And, well, that's also related to that number 3, I guess, of yours. Control geometry. And I expect to be iterating over this multiple times until you are able to at least lift off. Exactly. Exactly. That's the idea. So it's going to be much more an iterative... cyclic. We're going to revisit all of these menus many times while we are doing test flights in order to optimize it, and that's going to be actually the biggest chunk of the whole PlaneMaker chapter, rather than just making the visual look, the model itself. I would rather first start with the fuselage, because we have a body coefficient of drag here that we should put in, and we started with making the fuselage. It's now fitting with the wings as well. Body texture has to do with with our next stage of development. I have no idea what this is about. What we should wrap around some textures around the fuselage. That's not where we are currently. Not our current focus. So let's first put this one in. Drag coefficients. And I think the same is also true, or is also needed for the wings with all of the flaps and stuff. And I think that's... let me see, that's with control geometry. So still you need to set particular timings, and I think also drag coefficients, but I'm not quite sure. Well, for example here, lift coefficient for and the drag and the moment. I have no idea where we could find this information. I'm hoping that we already found a manual where you can just copy paste that stuff or approximate that stuff. Trim and speed is also things that we need to set, but perhaps therefore we need to load it up and explain to have an idea what it's currently at. I have no idea whether 20 seconds is too much or too little. I have no idea. Phase out, also no idea. Speed rates, we don't need control forces. Reference speed for pitch force. Spring and damping. So as you can see, there's still, now we're really getting into PlaneMaker and getting to the right numbers and putting them all in. Roll damping and stuff. So yeah, intuitively I would say we start with the same components that we already started with building the Skyhawk, but that might not be the right way to go. Because, as you can imagine perhaps, all of these numbers that we set, well, we should, I think first we should bring in some objective measures into PlaneMaker. So the numbers that we can find in the manuals, we should put in. So we got a baseline, right? But then obviously, as was suggested, or recommended actually, it's all about that subjective feel for the Skyhawk until it needs to fly like a Skyhawk in X-Plane. And then when we need to tweak all of these numbers here in PlaneMaker, we need to be more systematic about it, because when we change, for example, one number in one of these different sections, it might also interact with numbers set in other sections here, as you can imagine. And if you are unaware of that stuff, or a little bit sloppy there, you might go in circles and circles and circles, changing the one thing, but then the other thing is also off, and you're well, it's a never-ending story. So I think there's some kind of myriad, some kind of way by which we should, a section where we should start first that makes sense, that really defines most of the other kind of numbers that we need to put in, and work from there until we eventually come to, I guess, more secondary numbers that we can tweak. And well, it will not be just one run. Obviously, we'll go through these numbers over and over based on our test flights, but it should be efficient as much as possible. So yeah, the question is, where would we start? Well, Toe already said, well, engine specs first, weight and balance then, and then control geometry. I think it kind of makes sense, at least in my mind now. Toe, I'm not quite sure. I would say, well, control geometry, so the ailerons and the rudders and the elevators, you should calibrate based on how well the engine performs and the weight and balance. I can imagine that engine specs and weight and balance define almost how your control geometry should be set, rather than doing the other way around. So I think, because I have no other idea on how to approach this, and I just believe in Toe, I trust him. And we'll just have to start somewhere. We will start with the engine specs. I think that's a good idea. Now, engine specs, a lot of stuff, but also some stuff that I know that we already read. So for example, the red line for the RPM. Well, where is it for the Skyhawk 172? We can just put that in. Maximum power, horsepower. I have no idea still what these numbers are, but I believe we have some manuals that describe those. And otherwise we need to search. Well, jet engine specs, that's stuff that we don't need. Rocket engine specs, also something that we don't need. Afterburners, beta, all kinds of stuff. Reverse is also not what we are interested in. FADEC automatically keeps engine from exceeding max allowable power or thrust. This option lets the engine on this plane to be controlled by full authority digital engine control systems. Sounds not applicable for the Skyhawk 172, but at least not with our basic systems. Really curious to learn more about the engine of the Skyhawk and put it all in. RP, I just sent the email. Thank you, man. Thanks. A email with a manual on how to do test flights. That's awesome. So what I would suggest, so the location we're already set, so our propeller is already spinning there, but that's just a model. We did set in the right kind of engine, so that's good. But as you can see here, there are many other numbers that we should put in, I guess. Design proper RPM. This is the prop RPM that you want your prop to be optimized for. Design airspeed through prop disk. This is the airspeed through the prop disk that you want your prop to be optimized for. Note, for airplanes, this is approximately equal to the forward speed of the plane you want to optimize for plus half the prop wash. For helicopters, it should only be half the prop wash since the forward speed, blah, 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 blah. This is the airspeed through the prop disk. So I guess that's the disk, I think, is the circle that the propeller blades travel through. Design propeller RPM. And design airspeed through prop disk. Again, one more time. This is the airspeed through the prop disk that you want your prop to be optimized for. This is approximately equal to the forward speed of the plane you want to optimize for. For what? For cruise, for landing, for plus half the prop wash. Plus, what is a prop wash number? This is the number of times the engine rotates for each rotation of the prop. The number of times the engine rotates for each rotation of the prop. Okay. I thought that would be exactly the same. I recommend one for the main rotor using, well, that's for helicopters. I recommend one for the main rotor using the rotor speed for all engine limits and using a number less than for a tail rotor, which actually has a lower ratio. RP, also I'm a CFI with 1,000+ hours in a 172, so if you need flight heuristic help, let me know. Awesome, RP, good to know. Thanks for offering your help there. Yeah, to me, well, I'm just a sim pilot though. So at UncertifiedPilot.com I describe the stuff that I've been doing so far. On Pilot Edge, I'm trying to approach realism, realism as best as I can, and coming as close to an instrument rated, real world instrument rating and flight simulator as I possibly can, which is quite hard. But I'm also noticing with this project that making an aircraft, designing an aircraft, at least just virtually for X-Plane, is an entirely different game. And also develops an appreciation for the Skyhawk and how difficult engineering is, and also just aircraft development for our flight sim. So it's an entirely different ball game, which is kind of cool. So yeah, I'm just going through these steps just to have a sense of what's there. So when we look through the manuals, we might recognize terms, labels, and we say, ah, we got that, we can put that in. So first, that objective kind of search for numbers and putting those in, I guess, as creating a baseline of numbers that we know are right, and that we have, and then we can work with that with test flights to make it work. Yes, okay, transmission. We don't have transmission, I would say. Transmission losses. This is how much of the engine's power is lost to the transmission. You should have about 0 to 0.02 for regular airplanes, 0.4 for single engine halos, and 0 for twin engine halos. This should include all drags on the engine, including any generators, belts, chain drives that distracts from the full rated power. Okay, transmission losses. And what's the measure? I mean, 0, 0.02 of what? Part. What does part mean? Is it a percentage or number of transmissions? I would say just one. This is the number of independent transmissions that you have. Each transmission connects engine and prop that turn together. Yes, for a single engine plane, enter 1. Yeah, for a twin engine, enter 2. For something like the V2, enter 1. A gear 2 common transmission. For a helicopter 1. All right, makes sense. Engine 1 drives transmission. Yeah, that's true. The engine freewheels. Check yes, and the engine will not slow down the rotor or prop if it fails. This would be typical for a helicopter, whose rotor must continue to turn even if the engine is stopped. Yes, for almost all airplanes, though, the engine is connected directly to the prop. Yes, so the engine cannot freewheel. Yeah. It's a rigid connection to the engine. Yeah, because then the entire chain here, the engine, the prop is mounted onto that crankshaft, or I don't know the right name still. I should study those as well. That spinning thing inside of the engine that is hooked onto the cylinders. And so yeah, if that thing stops turning because the engine is not working, then the prop should also stop. And we've got a additional drag going on there. Prop 1 is driven by transmission. Yeah, this is not that. Radiator per engine. Radiator. What's a radiator? Radiator is in prop wash. Explain will average all prop washes. Prop wash. Prop wash is... I'm not sure anymore. I thought it was just the curve of wind, a vortex of wind going around the aircraft through because of the turning of the propeller. But I'm not sure. Prop wash. Prop wash. Pure prop wash is if you disturbed mass of air or water pushed aft. Yes. But the propeller of an aircraft provided during a byproduct of thrust produced by a propeller. Roger. Okay. Radiator is in prop wash. So the radiator is... Yeah, sorry guys, I'm not at all as technical literate in terms of aviation, let alone cars or other stuff. Engine radiator. Radiators are heat exchangers used for cooling internal combustion engines, mainly in automobiles, but also in piston engine aircraft. Real locomotives, blah blah. Internal combustion engines are often cooled by circulating a liquid called engine coolant. But we've got a air-cooled engine, isn't it? Engine coolant is usually water-based, but also be oil. This is in our case as well. Our oil also acts as a cooling mechanism to employ water pump, blah blah blah, modern circuit radio, airflow, other factors. Aircraft. Aircraft with liquid-cooled piston engines, using inline engines rather than radial, also require radiators. Reducing drag is a major goal in aircraft design, obviously, including the design of cooling systems. An early technique was to take advantage of aircraft's abundant airflow to replace the honeycomb core. Yeah, many services with a high ratio of surface to volume by a surface-mounted radiator. Excuse me. This uses a single surface blended into the fuselage or wing skin, with the coolant flowing through pipes at the back of this surface. Ah. Interesting. As they are so dependent on airspeed, surface radiators are even more prone to overheating when ground running. Obviously, racing aircraft such as blah 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 blah. Pressurized cooling systems. Evaporative cooling. Radiator truss. An aircraft radiator contained in a duct heats the air passing through, causing the air to expand and gain velocity. This is called the Meredith effect. And high-performance piston aircraft, we are not high-performance, with well-designed low-drag radiators. The truss was significant enough to offset the drag of the duct. The radiator was enclosed. And at one point, there were even plans to equip the Spitfire with an afterburner by injecting fuel into exhaust duct after the radiator and igniting it. Radiator is in prop wash. Well, if we got a radiator in that sense. I'm not sure about that. Duct expansion. Radiator front. I mean, I'm still amazed, also surprised, but also amazed by actually how many variables PlaneMaker provides us to create our aircraft. I mean, it's quite a thing. Radiator coefficient of drag. Ah, this is also a nice bit of information, by the way, that I also missed with the other boxes in PlaneMaker. So we need to also fiddle around with drag coefficients. 0 means no drag at all. 1 would simply stop the air completely. Okay, that's a good thing to know. I did not know that. Hey, Jim. It's looking mighty fine, my friend. It's good. I think it too. Yeah, we're gonna work on the engine and stuff to make it as getting this Skyhawk as quickly into the air as possible. RP, very few aircraft are liquid cooled. Yes, yeah. That's also why when we're going to do the run up with the Skyhawk, we prefer to pointing our nose into the wind, so additional air is coming into the engine to cool it down while we're in high RPMs at the ground and not creating any airflow other than our prop. But I'm not sure how this relates to the Skyhawk though. Spool up, boost, auto start, N1. I don't think this is prop turboprop times. Okay. Auto start fuel engine gauge 1. Percentage. Turboprop zone, yes. Introduce fuel above its end, yeah. Hot start, minimum fuel engage 1. Yeah. We don't have an N1 with our Skyhawk. Engine start fuel intro time. My gosh. This is how long fuel introduction takes to ramp from nothing to idle during the engine start process. Man. Fuel pump advance time. Oh. This is how many seconds it will take the fuel flow to go from idle to max when the throttle is firewalled suddenly, so completely pushed forward. This is really a fuel pump or FADEC limit. This is how many seconds it would take the fuel flow to go from idle to max with the fuel pump. Okay? Yeah, I don't think that this stuff is in manuals and should be based on just actual flying the thing. And I also, yeah, that's why it is just great to, it's best to create all of these or to base all of these numbers just on, well, subjective observations in the cockpit when flying a 172. Yeah, which we probably should. Jim, you have done so much in so little time. Great job. I cannot wait to see this in the air. No, me neither, Jim. Me neither. But still, though, I'm a little bit less naive. Also, after the chat with Rush, that even though this looks cool, and we did put some effort in. I mean, we're already well, quite some hours ahead with our development. It's still nothing. The thing cannot fly yet, and even more so, all of the care that we put into making the airfoil looking exactly like it should be can very well be altered in the next episodes for the sake of creating a more realistic flying Skyhawk. So this is a realistic looking one, but that doesn't mean that it will also fly realistically. And we might come to a final version of the Skyhawk, of our Skyhawk, that has weird looking, wrong looking flap cord sizes, dihedral stuff, whatever, for it to be a realistic flying model in X-Plane. So I kind of get why some have said, Tim, don't put that much time into this stuff, because it's not only about creating an objective. I mean, the objective appearance of the Skyhawk, that it looks right, is much more a Blender topic, because that's where we're going to make a graphical representation of that's where we're going to actually design the Skyhawk, and it has nothing to do with the physics. It has nothing to do with the aerodynamics. It's just the secondary model that's been put on top this PlaneMaker model. So that's where you should take a lot of care in making it right, following the pictures and stuff. But in terms of proper flight behavior, yeah, it doesn't really matter that these vertices are that most really nicely aligned and tucked away. And I mean, it was really fun work, and it's also my an introduction to 3D modeling. So that was cool. But yeah, eventually though, it's more about doing test flights and putting in the numbers, and with PlaneMaker and setting those numbers in order to make it fly like it should. So that's a good learning experience, and I still think this stuff was so variable and so much fun. So I don't regret doing that, but I'm getting a better feel of what we need to do as aircraft developers in the realm of flight simulation here. Yes, Jim, me too. But we're going to make both, I can assure you. It needs to be it needs to fly realistically, and also looks really, really pretty. Also in terms of animations and interaction points that sim coders can work with to allow us to do all kinds of neat stuff. The problem is though, and that's a big limitation for me in that sense, is because that subjective dimension of aircraft development is so important, I need to be, well, the two things actually. I need to be very knowledgeable of aerodynamics to interpret the flight performance of our Skyhawk in order to make proper modifications to the model of our aircraft. That's one. I mean, we could just do some trial and error, but then we'll be tinkering with the Skyhawk for the entire year, which we don't have time for. And second, I'm not a real-world Cessna 172 pilot, so I'm just basing my experience based on some introductory, if just a few introductory flights with the Cessna 172, and flying the default 172 and the airfoil labs and also A2As 172. So I might be referencing, comparing our Skyhawk to also not really realistic models. So that's why, as a test pilot, the biggest test would be to, when it's done, or an alpha version, to send it to RP, for example, and ask him, fly it, and do you think it's right? But then again, he needs to also be able to interpret the flight performance and say, well, this is off, something is off, and needs to be able to put his finger on that particular variable or something, because otherwise, yeah, we might all say, well, it's a bit off, but it doesn't help. It doesn't provide really substantive input for optimizing our Skyhawk. And that's the challenge, and which also well, requires again for me to further study aerodynamics and the Skyhawk. So the real work is actually still starting, even though it looks nice. And we've already spent quite a number of hours. This is actually still not the heart of what we need to do with PlaneMaker. But I cannot wait to do those test flights, and I can also not wait learning more about the engine. As in, looking very good already, thanks, as in. Okay, so we're moving on. So spool up boost, so fuel pump advance time, compressor spool up time. What's a compressor? Free turbine, yeah, I guess. I mean, compressor rings a bell, but it has to do more with air compressing, I think. And it's not something that we necessarily do with our Skyhawk. Free turbine drops only, yeah. Given how much inertia the compressor has, a large number here will result in compressor to spool up more slowly. Propeller pitch rate. This is how many degrees per second the prop rotates to adjust its pitch. 45 degrees per second is default. But this is only with a sky lane, I guess, when we have a prop lever. Or is it also just... This is how many degrees per second the prop rotates to adjust its pitch. Okay. Again, new concepts. Sounds. Jet engine specific fuel consumption, turboprop, reciprocating or turboprop specific. Electric engines is also cool that we can make such a thing, and perhaps in the near future, the very near future. I think that's the Skyhawk 5 years ago or so. Cessna started a new project where they were working on electric engines, but they stopped the project and no one knows why. So that's interesting. Even though now more companies start with creating electric engines. There's actually quite a nice documentary here on Dutch television about those green aviation pioneers, which was nice. Anyways, electric engines. What's at the bottom? Speed that wind sound was recorded at. Oh yeah, interesting. Used for setting the sounds and explain. RPM that the propeller sound was recorded at. Where do we set those sounds then? I would expect a browse kind of input here where we can refer to the sounds, but... And one that the jet or turbo... No, we don't, yeah. Martin, there are fixed pitch props and variable pitch props. Yeah. I assume a 172 does not have the label. No, me neither. Correct me if I'm wrong though. Yeah, I have no idea. I would say that's the blue prop lever in the cockpit, and we don't have one. The Skyline has. So I'm not quite sure. Engine number to set. Exhaust offset. This is where the exhaust is emitted from the engine relative to the engine location. Oh, interesting. Well, we already know those numbers, right? Because we already modeled our exhaust also as part of a tiny drag coefficient that we're going to add. Still, we're going to add. So that's the location. So that's going to be quite basic. Exhaust dirtiness. Interesting. Ratio to default. Okay, so it's just one. Yeah, so I guess we need to set an engine fire and see what it does. Yeah. Prop geo. Prop geo. What does it mean? And here we don't get a hover over. I have no idea what this means. Prop geo incidence. That sounds familiar. Set prop element incidence manually. So I guess also the prop has a particular angle of incidence when it's cutting through the air. But why do we have so many different stations? Chord, mag, and the angle of attack, I guess. So we can set the different chords. So let's... Can we change these? No. LE offset, TE offset. Prop 1. Prop advance J is V divided by blah 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 blah. Omega. Prop advance inches per rev. Rotor advance. Test speed through disk. Test speed of prop. Why don't we get any hover overs here? That's a bit annoying. Test altitude of airplane. LE offset. Maybe just search for that. It's a bit weird that we don't find any information on that here through PlaneMaker. Aircraft, engine, prop geo. I guess propeller geo. It's also yeah, I don't know, abbreviated. LE. No, this is all rubbish. PlaneMaker. Oh, leading edge, trailing edge. Thank you, RP. Leading edge and trailing edge. Yes, so we got a leading edge. That's this part here that now goes to the other side. And the trailing edge is, yeah, the end bit of the prop cord. And we can have an offset there. This is all 0. So let's see what happens if we... Oh, there it goes. Now it becomes a weapon. Some devils. Let's put it here. Now we can really kill. Bird strike is no more. Or we spike them and we have some for barbecue. But okay, so that's an offset. So here we can create the prop geo, the prop shape. Okay. So I would really like to find some information about this stuff. And also it seems to refer to particular stations. And those are these, we can already see those here. In the prop, I should actually stop the movement, but you can see we got different different stations here. I think we didn't set those, so these are just a given. And you can see here it chord. Yeah, but what chord? Why can't we give it a different instance? Because it's at the core? At the root? No. Set prop element instance manually. Now we can set it. Interesting. Yeah, so this is the main screen. Again, this is the main screen where we need to set the prop. I guess it's also going to make a lot of a difference. Interesting. So you could almost say that the prop geo tab is kind of like the airflow maker for the prop. Almost. I mean, in a way we're doing this with the wings as well. It's actually, no, I shouldn't say airflow maker. I should just say the same way that we looked at and studied the wings is the same for the prop. But it doesn't have a dihedral or sweep or stuff, apparently. But yeah. Okay. Hey, Lex, ninja blade, exactly. It was a ninja blade. And what we see here are just numbers that referring to the stuff that we said here. So if we change something up with these numbers, leading edge, trailing edge, offset, we see what the effect might be on the chord size. No, because we see all zeros here in the tables and these numbers do change. So it's based off of the relative position of that particular station in the prop. But what chord? What does it say then? Chord what? Chords, the particular chord station. Does the number even change? Yes, it does. Mag, an angle of attack. Yeah, so I guess these are just readouts that we can use to make sure that the prop shape is good. Okay, jet curves we don't need, and the other jet curves not. So we got a general description where we can set some basic things: top of green arc, red line, bottom of green arc. Yeah, maximum power, horsepower, critical altitude, maximum altitude at which full power available at 0 speed. Engines generally put out less power at high altitude due to thinner air. Yes, but turbocharging can keep packing in air even at high altitude. Yeah, the compressing and stuff. Yeah, the critical altitude is the highest altitude at which the engine can still put out full power. This altitude can be above sea level either by putting a turbocharger on a reciprocating engine or down rating a jet or turbo prop. Enter 0 for the critical altitude if you are doing neither. We're doing neither. Okay. 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 Manuals. Let's see. Performance assessment manual, I think, where we found a lot of info. Let's see what we have, if we can put it in. And again, it's dated, so this is not going to be the 172S. So perhaps it's better to search for that stuff first. So we can put that in and then see whatever we still need to put in and yeah, go to the secondary manuals. Okay, information manual then. Don't know what manual I need to use to get all of the right information. For example, here. Engine, a Textron Lycoming, 2700 RPM. What does that mean? Is that the highest RPM? Is that red line? I don't think so. But it's max what it can, maximum power, but that's horsepower. I think we said it here. Yeah, here, design. No. Yeah, idle and stuff. I think we need to, right here, pitch diameter. It's 27 inches. That's also a nice location. What do we have currently? Prop radius is 3.2 feet. 76 inches, 2 feet. That's 6.3. Got much too small, but 6.3? No. This is a sword. But it's the diameter. Yeah. So, obviously, we need to have... Well, it's not exactly the radius, though. Is it? No, because that stuff is in the spinner. There's a bit of the prop in the spinner, but it's also here in the spinner. Yeah, it's behind the thing. So, yeah, half. Divided by 2. 3.16. We're not off at all. 3.16. Yay. Power loading. So that's pounds per horsepower. Wing loading. Power loading. Don't know what that is, and it doesn't ring a bell of what we were looking at. Oh man, I'm tired from work. Sorry guys. Different state of mind than last week. No, I don't think that we've seen anything about that before. Yeah, then we get into just general stuff. And yeah, the prop. Yeah, I'd rather stick to the main manuals first, but power, 140 horsepower. This book includes a very basic drag analysis of a 172 based on the following information. Here, total drag coefficient. Yeah, this is also interesting. This is also what Rush was referring to with the wings. He mentioned quite briefly, like, okay, the root starts with the 2412, and then that tip stuff, there's where it goes from 2412 to symmetric. And that's not what we are doing. We did account for the prop wash, but not for the symmetric stuff. And we can also not do that with Airfoil Maker because there's just one airfoil that we're making. There, you can only assign that stuff just one, or we need to make 20 airfoils and divide our wing into subdivisions, which is not the way to go. It will also quite be a drag on frame rates, or unnecessarily so. And we could also just change the outer wing section to symmetric entirely, but I think that's also not good. I will just keep it at the NECA 2412. Let me see any other stuff. Wing data. Oh, interesting. That's interesting. The airfoil section of the horizontal tail data for the 177. Okay. Do we see it here mentioned? No. It's the 172. Never mind. Yeah, they use the 177 here as well. This guy is just doing some calculations with the 172 and he's just gathering information too. And he says, well, I did find some stuff on the system 177 and it kind of approximates the same thing that the system 172 is doing. But yeah, it's not exact. For example, here with the tail areas, they have one for the system 172 and the system 177, and clearly it differs. Let me see what I can find still. Propeller diameter 75 inches. Propeller speed 2700 RPM. That's what it can do. Is that red line? It's just what it can do maxed out. Design RPM. This is the prop RPM that you want your prop to be optimized for. That's not it, I think. This is the maximum allowable engine RPM. I would say that is the only one that I can think of, 2700s. But if I look at the actual red line, let me just have a look. Perhaps I'm just completely wrong. It says the Skyhawk 172S red line RPM. Yeah, Martin, I was thinking the same, but I thought perhaps just look it up at the... Yeah, never... 180 rated brakes horsepower. Is it the 172 SP? Yes. Well, there we got our horsepower, but it's brakes horsepower. What's the difference? Brakes horsepower is a measurement of an engine's power without any power losses. Well, horsepower is brakes horsepower less the power loss. Horsepower is measured by hooking up the engine to a dynamometer, while beer is used in a controlled environment without anything attached to the engine. Ah, interesting. Interesting. Yeah, so that's just purely the engine. But we obviously want to make it run with the engine attached, or the prop attached to the engine. $2,500 is red line, 2700 is max. Exactly. Thanks, RP. Yeah, 2,500. That seems more obvious. But where do we need to... I would expect that we need to put in the max as well somewhere. Propeller. 2 blades, diameter 76 inches, fixed pitch, one piece forged aluminium alloy. I saw something about that. Prop mass ratio to solid aluminium. This is how heavy the prop rotor is compared to one made of pure aluminium. Composite props, for example, are lighter. Heavier props speed up and slow down more slowly, yes, and provide more auto rotation ability in helicopters. Tip Weights on rotors, pounds each. Well, we are just solid aluminium, I would say. And this is all fuel stuff. Yes, top of green arc. Let me just get the RPM. How is it called? Tachometer? And there it is. 172. Seems like just about right. Well, red line is a bit more actually on this. It's 25, 26, 2700. One, two, three, four, 5, 6, 7. It's 700s. RP, I think. If I look at these pictures. So red line is max. Yeah, here's hard to see. Yeah, here's exactly the same. Nice picture. 2700. Top of green arc. Yeah, but that's the same. Top of green arc is the beginning of the green arc. This is the maximum RPM that can be obtained with the prop control. That might be 2500. That other picture showed some additional. Where was it? I hear it's 2500, but this is with the A2A 172. That's interesting. So the A2A says 2500, but it couldn't be that that's the difference between the 172S and the 172SP? That the 172SP has more power? I don't know. Hey Andrew, good to see you. Brake horsepower is a different measure than crank horsepower. Yes, Martin. It sounds weird to me to have brake horsepower in the plane since it's common with cars. Oh, okay. How is it going? Well, so generally, just a summary is our primary goal right now is to make our Skyhawk fly well so we can test flight it. And although that sounds more like a summative kind of exercise, it's actually much more formative. So we like to test fly it. So based on those test flights, we can tweak our flight model to make it fly much more like a real world 172 rather than as a kind of end task, just as a celebration flight almost. So I've skipped PlaneMaker and we're now looking into getting in all the numbers so that the engine actually works and performs like it should, at least based on the numbers that we find. We should probably tweak this stuff as well while we are doing our test flights, or based off of our test flights. The same with our control surfaces and weight and balance and stuff. So we're actually making it bootable for X-Plane right now so that we can fly it and start our test flying stuff. So that's what we're working on, and it's really interesting. Also now venturing or learning more about the engine of the Skyhawk. Here it was. Yeah, so you see in this picture also a sea level 5,000 feet, 10,000 feet, or I don't know what that is. But here the red line is at 2,700. So what is it? Cessna Skyhawk. Max RPM. 2700 we've already seen. 2700. RPM, top of green arc. Yes. Oh, again, it's mentioned here as well. Here, normal operation range, green arc, 2100 to 2700. But that's, I don't get why they then mention the same thing. A red line and a top of green arc is, at the top of the green arc is the red line, isn't it? Yes, and multiple widths of the green arc indicate recommended power settings at sea level or at 10,000 feet respectively. Bit weird. Top of green arc, and in the description says this is the maximum RPM that can be obtained with the prop control. What there? Oh, but the prop control is not the throttle, it's that blue prop lever. And we don't have that one in the Skyhawk. So therefore it should be set at 2700, I guess. I have to see. Bottom of green arc, that's 2100. Isn't it? 2100 to 2700. And can we see that as well? Yes, we can see that. Minimum prop governor. Do we have a governor? If you pull the prop control back, we don't have a prop control. You can lower the RGM to this setting. Yes, this does not include reverse or better or feathered. Enter the prop pitches for those things over to the left, and whatever RPM you get as a result, you get. Yeah, so this stuff is all not for us. Idle. That's a good one, isn't that 550? Andrew, keep it the same, exactly. Severo, there are planes where you have a yellow arc. Means not recommended, but will not kill the engine, I guess. And PlaneMaker is not only for the Skyhawk. Ah. Good one. Okay, so we'll keep it there. Yeah, idle. Idling. Cessna Skyhawk. RPM. Idle. Idle RPM. Is there a standard? Is there a standard? Yeah, no. This is just a run up. I mean, when you're flying the Skyhawk, ideally you would never go to idle, because you always like the engine to run at least 1000 RPM just to keep it warm and stuff. And so that's not the idle that I'm referring to, meaning the actual physical technical idle. So idle is perhaps not the right word. Can we find anything on that? RPM idle. $600 RPM. Yeah. Note that the idle RPM was 400, 500. 500 RPM idle typically. And again, this is stuff I guess. Yeah, I shall stabilize around 500 to 600 RPM. That also sim coders would eventually just manipulate. But I'd like to read it somewhere. What's the idle RPM? Between 500 or 600. Perhaps it also depends on your mixture setting and air density and stuff. Whether it's 500 or 550 or 600 even. Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, but the problem might be that if we look for the engine, we might get that brake horsepower thing where we just read about how the engine, what the RPM of the engine alone is when it's idle. And I like to see it, I guess that's what PlaneMaker is referring to, what the idle RPM is when it's connected to the aircraft and with the prop and stuff. And I would expect it just to be referenced somewhere. Yeah, slow idle between 400 and 600 RPM. So I guess we can just set it, I would say 500s. Minimum prop. Governor we skipped. Okay, beta stuff. What is it? Coarse pitch of prop in alpha mode. It's also not relevant for us, I guess. Feathered, we also don't need. Maximum power, yeah, I still like to know that. HP engine. HP. Yes. Horsepower for takeoff, 180. 180. I guess that's it. Still like to know a little bit more. How does that work? This is the maximum horsepower output of the engine, obtained at sea level at standard temperature and density. Oh, that's a, yeah, there's a difference in how to use the decimal between the US and in Europe. So 180 then, I think. And 160. Here, max power 2700. Well, again, this is based off the 1977 index. And perhaps that's a Skyhawk N or a Skyhawk whatever. But not the Skyhawk SP. And perhaps the engine has already been improved so much. Andrew, when can we start making livery? So if we look at the progress bar so far, it's once we did all the actual flight modeling stuff for X-Plane. So that's going to take a while still. And I thought it was much more around the corner, much more close by, the whole livery stuff. But first we need to really tinker with PlaneMaker, sending all of these numbers, making our Skyhawk airworthy that we can fly it. But then most likely it will not be demonstrating correct flight behavior. So that's when we need to do proper test flights. And that's going to be fun as well. We need to fly and collect as much data in a sensible manner, so we can then go back into PlaneMaker and do changes and then fly again. And we need to do that in a quite structured and systematic way. I cannot wait to do that, also just to fly again with our Skyhawk. Man, that's going to be weird. First, we're going to need to start up the engine. We need to check whether the idle RPM is working. We need to check how it tags these. A lot of stuff that we need to do. And once we did that, then we can make a very basic livery, which is not really that relevant. But I'd like to give my Skyhawk a little bit of a color there. And then we can load it up and go to Blender and create a proper model off of the model that we made here. And then this Photoshop, this Photoshop stuff, the last part is going to be also a little bit more extensive than I think or thought initially. Because we also need to make textures for the entire cockpit. Oh man, I cannot wait to do that. I mean, the cockpit stuff, oh, I'm gonna be very precise with that. It's gonna be really cool. Anyways, so I don't quite trust this manual because it's quite dated, or reference to quite dated. I mean, this is also the SP 2006 180 horsepower for takeoff. So perhaps we just need to go to the Skyhawk website, don't you think? It should give us some specs. Look at that. Still, I prefer the non-GPS layout, but perhaps it's just me. Power plant, 180 horsepower. So it is. To metal, fixed pitch. But metal is something different than aluminium. So where did we see that? Was that with the description? Yeah, here, prop mass ratio to solid aluminium. Should just be metal. So in reference to aluminium, I don't know. I just don't know. But 180 is set. Ram inlet pressure recovery. Do we have ram? This is the percentage of the ram air pressure that your inlet manages to recover to increase engine air density. That your inlet manages to recover to increase engine air density. A perfect inlet and exhaust engine could actually be above 100% here, since the air density is raised on the inlet. Yes, but not on the exhaust. No. So ram air pressure does more than just increase engine air density. It can lower exhaust back pressure. My Evolution delivers 120% efficiency here, better than you might think, because it pressurizes the engine inlet but not the exhaust outlet. Oh, interesting. So the inlets are here. That's where the air comes in. But pressure recovery, this is the percentage of the ram air pressure that your inlet manages to recover to increase engine air density. Are these numbers available? I have no idea. Let alone if we're going to do test flights, I have no idea how this particular measure relates to, at least not yet, but it seems quite advanced to me. Morning, maintenance manual. It's looking good. I've got the maintenance manual as well, by the way, here. It's most likely going to be the exact same thing. So rather than downloading duplicates, the 172 maintenance manual. Engine. Lycoming, blah, 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 blah. Let's see what it gives us. Engine piston, blah, blah, blah. We didn't check with the maintenance manual, Martin, so that's a good reminder. But I think it's not so much related to so how many hours after whom, how many hours does the engine needs to be replaced. Nah, this is not the manual. Just to be sure. Engine data. Whew. Yeah, so the 172R has a max of 2400 RPM, but the S is 2700. Horsepower 160, the S has 180. What type of propeller? The Macaulay 1 blah 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 blah. Can we? No, I guess not. But perhaps we should look for that one. I'm just gonna write it down and just copy paste it here, because oh yeah, the size of the tire we worked with. Perhaps we can look that name up and then get specs on the airfoil. No, that one. No, that one neither. I just want to go to my stickies. There they are. The Macaulay prop. Yes. As I said, the mechanics should know this stuff. Yeah, so one would assume the manual has the information. Yeah, exactly, Martin. Yes, this seems all correct. We already set this stuff already. Except for the cable tension things, but yeah. Air inlet cover to prevent. Yes, obviously. Let me just make sure. The engine, look at that. I'm not going to go through all of these pages because then we'll be sitting here tomorrow, but maintenance manual is still a resource to keep. Yeah, I'm not sure about the mass ratio. Also, it seems like a PlaneMaker like of... Yeah, Macaulay. Kind of thing. Propeller mass ratio to solid aluminium 172. Prop mass ratio. Yeah, forums explain. I'm trying to get the prop mass ratio figure for the prop that I'm designing. The question is, what value to set it to? Exactly. One is solid aluminium blades. A composite, hollow, or wooden blades are probably less than 1.0. The exact alloy weight ratio compared with aluminium, I doubt that's significant enough to worry about. Yeah, what's significant? I don't know, but I like to be precise. Apparently it's something. And you don't need exact value here, just some sort of magnitude. A wooden prop will slightly vary in density depending on the weather. No reason to fuzz over it. I want to fuzz over it. Just wanted to mention that I found the answer to my question. For anyone that's interested, it's outlined on page 51 on the PlaneMaker menu. Here's the paragraph directly from the manual. The propeller mass ratio, we should always look in the manual. A parameter determines the density of the propeller, which affects how easy the propeller speeds up. So yeah, we know. This set is a ratio to... Yeah, I mean, aluminium has a density of 2,700 kilo per cubic meter. So if your propeller had a density of, say, 1,000 kilo per cube, you would set this to 1,000 divided by 2,000. Yeah. Okay. In Explain, it seems RPM is horsepower. It sometimes uses prop density to fine-tune horsepower. Interesting. Okay. I mean, the forums are also so good to look at. It's not really authoritative kind of information, but it's interesting just to get yourself thinking. Yeah, it's metal. So we can approximate it, I guess. Ratio, weight, aluminium to metal. But I guess there are different metals. I don't know. Steel weight calculator. I mean, what an aircraft development project brings you to? Steel versus... Well, not steel. Metal converter. I don't know. I just want a ratio. I want a ratio. Steel weight calculators. Select your steel. Yeah, well, what we could do is get back to my stickies and see if we can already find it. Something about Macaulay, blah, 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 prop. Enter. airpowerinc.com. All right. That sticker sounds familiar. $4,000. You got yourself a prop. But yeah, this is interesting. But service bulletin. No. New propeller. No. Well, eBay did provide me with some, yeah. View details. This might actually come in handy. So I already mentioned with the modeling stuff that, especially on eBay, sellers make a lot of pictures of their stuff to increase their chances of selling the thing. And that provides us as aircraft developers with a lot of material to work from. So actually I'm going to save this one. Should make a folder for this. But again, this stuff doesn't provide you with any numbers or stuff. I was just looking at Macaulay at home. Yeah, you would expect that there would be something. Yeah. So type. What are we? Fixed pitch. We are Cessna. We are 172 SP. And yeah, search. Minimum static RPM, max static RPM. Approval. Yeah, this is nice information, but print results. Are you actually going to print that page? I'd like to see much, much more. But I guess that's secret, super duper secret. Then what we can do is use the same thing, but say a mass ratio. Perhaps that gives us something. Let's stick those together. Nope. All right. 172. And if we cannot find it, we cannot find it. And I guess we won't find anything about it. So we know that it's metal. So again, how do you say that? Material or metal? Metal? It's a fixed pitch metallic propeller, exactly. 3-bit constant. System was into Skyhawk, indeed. Yeah. Selection from other companies. No, I would like to read more about. But if I now hit this, I will go to an entirely different. Power systems, propeller systems, analysis. This is it. Yeah, density. How much lighter is aluminium than steel? Steel is typically 2.5 times denser. But that's steel. I'm not looking for steel. I'm looking for metal. Metal. Yeah, what kind of metal? The solid aluminium. Aluminum. Not that it matters. Metal. I'm just a little bit curious though. You got metal and you got steel. Is steel a particular kind of metal or the other way? Yeah, is there a difference? In terms of metal and steel are constantly used in the same capacity, but are really the same. If you ever seen steel, a popular material for construction, consumer products. In fact, the difference between metal and steel is highly overlooked in a world that often thinks of steel as a type of metal. Even in the professional community, these terms are used together. Steel is commonly used as a building material, and metal buildings, as they are referred to, are often made of steel. That's why you may be familiar with the term, yeah. But the two are not one and the same. Technically should not be used interchangeably. So what's the difference? A metal is a chemical element of various opaque, fusible, ductile, source. Blah. The elements referred to in that definition are the same ones you study when you learn about the periodic table on the elements. Yeah, steel on the end is an alloy of iron with varying amounts of carbon content. Yeah, so it's completely different. So again, metal, weight, aluminum. How much lighter is aluminum than metal? Yeah, again. Yeah, but that's not good. Weight of various metals in pounds per cubic foot. That works. Aluminium is 168.48, but metal is always that's the problem, I guess. Yeah, so you won't find metal in this list. Because what kind of metal? What, it has some iron in it. Is there anything about this? No, it wouldn't be very unlikely to be mentioned somewhere. Yeah, indeed, it's just a group. I would say, based also of that steel stuff, and also if I look at that table, that it would approximate, I mean, aluminum is quite light. So looking at iron and all of the different metally like, aluminum is also, aluminum is also a metal, by the way. It's kind of double and a bit more, so I would say 2.5. We'll have to see. We've got some reference here, which is better than nothing. 2.5. Tip weights on rotors. No, we don't have those. Okay, so we got max horsepower, ram inlet pressure recovery. I have no idea. You could search for that. Skyhawk 172 ram inlet pressure recovery. Would surprise me if we would find anything. Spin recovery, no. Ram, I should stick those together. Ram inlets. Yeah. No, that's not what I wanted. Ram inlet. Is to provide the engine compressor with a uniform supply of air in order to prevent the compressor from slowing. But we don't have a compressor, so is it just something that I can skip, or? I'm also gonna put my idle to 550 because it was between 500 and 600. Because this is all about jets and stuff, and it's relating to, but it's in the section of props though. A ram inlet pressure recovery. No idea. Okay. Okay. And general engine specs. This is something we don't need to set. FADEC automatically keeps engines from exceeding. No, we don't have that. Throttle available at max lever engine. One engine field. We don't have that. Throttle available at max lever. All engines running. I guess just one, just 100%. This is the maximum throttle that the engine can be set to and explain with all engines operative. All engine specs, RPM, manifold pressure, max power, everything are set in PlaneMaker for 100% power. Going above 100% will take you above all the maximum that you enter here. Yeah, so just one. High idle fuel adjustment. An idle ratio of 1 should give a reasonable low idle. Adjust up a bit as needed to get high idle on your engine. Fuel ratio. Idle ratio of 1 should give a reasonable idle. Adjust up or down as needed as based on your engine. An idle ratio of 1 should give you a reasonable. Afterburner pitch reverse is something that we don't need. Auto set RPM and throttle based on power levers, also nothing. All engines have throttle governors right now. FADEC, no. All propellers feather when no. All propellers feather, no. All propellers feather after engine. All propellers shut off fuel when prop control is at min, no. And jet engines, and this is rocket engines. So we mostly completed the first step of the engines menu here. Ram inlet pressure recovery, I don't get. And the high idle fuel and low idle fuel adjustment I don't get. Fuel ratio. An idle ratio should give you a reasonable low idle adjust a bit. Yeah, what is it? Let me have a quick look at PlaneMaker and then call it a day. PlaneMaker. So, just got back and you're talking about ram inlet pressure. Yes, though. Oh, let me know. Sir, since also a turboprop engine has a propeller, PlaneMaker, there are settings for jets in the propeller. Yes, you need to know what is relevant for a piston and what for turboprop. Something is for both. Ah, well, because Sphero, they distinguish these settings for different kind of, also for jet engines and for rocket engines here. I thought that they already did that. So general engine specs I think would apply to all kinds of engines, but apparently it does not. What is idle fuel, high idle fuel and low idle fuel adjustment mean? And what is the ram inlet pressure recovery that I can set here? Those are the main questions, and if you guys know the answers, I would be very, very pleased. And there comes Toe. Martin first. Quick and unrelated question. What is the cone inside the airplane? Well, the cone inside the airplane, well, this thing, this is just a tip of the wing, I think. So because we're zoomed in, PlaneMaker is doing weird stuff. So there it is. If you mean this thing, this is a... how's it called? Skid at the end, so we can do a tail strike. And there's another cone here, which you cannot see currently. Oh, which is not visible. And that's the reference point. But I guess it was just due to the zoomed in thing. So, ram inlet pressure is the effect of the aircraft's fast movement through the air, pressurizing the air in the engine inlet. Yes, leading to an increase in power. Yes, that's also what I thought. That's also what I thought. But yeah, and it's negligible, but I'm not really inspired by such an answer. And I know that it's all negligible and I shouldn't worry, or not really worrying, but I care too much. But I'm interested though, and it is a number here, so I would expect it to be written down something. But I guess Rush would say, well, it doesn't mean that it should be written down somewhere in some manual. This is something that you can perhaps tweak during your test flights, but I don't like that stuff. I just like to have a baseline first. Martin ORC never noticed it before and just thought, what the hell? No, sure, not a problem, Martin. So at the airspeeds that the Cessna flies is going to be far below 1%. Well, that's really negligible. Ram inlet pressure recovery grows as power of 2, basically. Interesting. So thank you for your support here. So, and this is a, but yeah, so it's 1%. What are these even? Are these in percents? I can set it to up to 2. But if it's negligible, and I think it is, then I can just leave it at 0. But again, I have no reference of scale, so that's a fraction. I can show you the values for the TBM. Oh, please. So just to have a sense, what we could also do is just load up the default 172 and have an idea what Laminar is putting in. And then, guys, I'm going to close the stream to watch some television with Mrs. Uncertified. She's already longing to fly again in the sim, which is kind of cool. Should further nurture that. I would love to see her streaming here again. I'm doing a lap. I was challenging her by saying, well, are you still able to make that traffic pattern on your own? I mean, she did her solo here on the stream a while ago, and she did that perfectly, which also in a very short amount of time. So I'm quite curious to see if she can still do it, but don't know if she likes to stream it though. The values is best determined experimentally though. Alright. Seems like a very hard task though, to test fly, and experimentally discover whether the ram inlet pressure recovery, what it should be set by. In a way, that inlet then functions almost as a turboprop kind of thing, right? It compresses the air. But there's no real compressor in there, it's just an intake. So I get what you're saying, that it should be quite a negligible effect, but is it also documented somewhere, you think? In a manual or somewhere? I think not, but let me see. Whoop. The TBM. 0.9. That's a difference in horsepower, oh my gosh. But it's a turboprop, right? Why didn't you set the critical altitude or not yet? Because I think I read there that the critical altitude should also be part of the TBA. Fuel idle adjustment. Yeah, that's also I'm curious about, Joe. If you can perhaps share just a little bit, just a few pointers about the high idle fuel adjustment and low idle. Because I guess I need to set those as well for the Skyhawk, and I don't quite get what those mean. Yeah, because you're a turbo prop, and you also have adjustable pitch of the prop, so therefore all of this stuff do matter to you, I guess. But thanks for sharing. This gives a kind of a reference. I can bring it on the voice if you have a Discord. Yeah, sure, Toe. Are you already? Please, Discord we can use. I don't have your Discord yet. How can I invite you? Yeah, still, that's something that I find a little bit weird, but do you have an invite link? Yes, if you go to the page, my channel page here on Twitch, you find a link there with a invite link for the server, I guess. And there you can just post a message at the lobby, and I can we can call, I think. Is that easy? I don't know. Roger. Thanks, Toe. Well, I will pause my... I will assign you the role of an instructor, of an engineer right away, so you can also jump in more quicker into voice chat channels and stuff. Not that it really matters, but... High idle fuel adjustment and low idle. Hey, Toe! Lip. How do I then invite you? Toe. Toe. Add friend. Friend request. And I also give you a roles engineer. Calling you on a voice. Oh, I didn't set my notifications. Hello, hey. Toe. Thanks for the help, man.
No worries.
So, yeah, confused about all the settings in the engine pane here. So if you could give me any pointers, that would be... very much appreciated. So
sure, no worries. The settings are a little bit mixed in with turboprop and jet settings.
Roger.
So not all of them apply to you specifically. Let me see. So what the ram air inlet pressure recovery is, when the airplane is flying at a significant fraction of the speed of sound, just the fact of the air entering the inlet and being stopped at the engine intake is giving you a little bit of pressure recovery. So basically you're getting pressurization of the air, pre-pressurization, as if you had somewhat of a compressor in the inlet for free, even on a piston engine. But at the speeds of a Cessna, which is 120 knots if we're going to be generous, it's going to be probably less than 1% of power. And the inlet of a Cessna is really not designed for pressure recovery anyway, so it's not
just
quite
cooling,
the right shape. No, it's not not the right shape. In order to get some sort of pressure recovery,
sure,
the right shape.
Yeah. It should condense. It should bring air together, I guess, to compress it. And actually, the current inlets are doing the exact opposite.
Yeah, I mean, there's various designs. It's not quite just bringing it together. You have to position shock waves in the correct position, and yeah, you're gonna get like an acceleration of the air. You got to control where if there's any Mach points where it exceeds the speed of sound, you want to control those. Some divergence, some convergence. It's not so easy. So for the Cessna, it's probably going to be you know I'm going to explain to you exactly how I designed that value for the TBM. I don't have any documentation that gives you like for explain PlaneMaker, just put that in there. There's no such thing. The way I did it is I left it, let's say I left it at 0. I have a performance chart for the TBM that says at this altitude, you should be going this speed and producing this amount of power.
Roger.
And so I basically just tweak that value until at the specified weights and at the specified altitudes, ISA conditions, I am getting the right power value at the correct airspeed value. And then you're basically certain that you've got the right value in there.
Right, but then I'm a little bit confused about what power then means, because in my mind power is just RPM, but that's not
horsepower. So power, you can actually display it in X-Plane. If you go to data output, and then you can just type in engine power, and it'll give you horsepower values. Or the other possibility, if you want to, if many manufacturers actually don't specify for engines like piston engines, especially naturally aspirated, they're going to give you an RPM value and they're going to give you a manifold pressure.
Yes.
If you have an MP gauge, and you can actually also display RPM and manifold pressure in X-Plane. So just tune those until they say what they're supposed to say according to the POH, and also make sure that the airplane's flying at the correct speed and fuel consumption. That's where the other thing comes in. The high idle and fuel and low idle fuel adjustment. Those are primarily meant for turboprop engines, although they are to a degree also applicable for piston engines. They basically control the amount of fuel flow that the engine is getting, depending on where roughly your mixture position is. So low idle would be about a third, or almost basically the lowest fuel flow from almost nothing, and high idle would be basically your full rich, so to speak. There's also other values that are in SFC, or specific fuel consumption. That's the fifth tab.
Yeah, I see it.
And there you will be adjusting the representative altitudes. So X-Plane allows you to specify 2 altitudes, and it will interpolate your fuel flow between those 2 altitudes, and full power and half power. So it's basically like a 3-dimensional graph of altitude, power, and fuel flow.
Interesting stuff, and also complex in terms of, well, not that complex, I guess, but really part of my test flight activities.
Yes, exactly. And also at the bottom of that tab, at the bottom of the reciprocating and turboprop engine specific fuel consumption, there's the effective power at idle for fuel flow. So basically that gives you how much power the engine is developing at idle when it's just sitting still. That gives you your idle thrust, basically. Well, through the prop, it's going to give you your idle thrust. But for reciprocating engine, it's going to be fairly low. A reciprocating engine doesn't really produce all that much power. A turboprop engine produces a lot more power.
Can imagine.
Yeah, turbine engines generally run fairly high. So, and you're going to be adjusting that to basically get your idle thrust correct. On a Cessna, you're not going to be able to move with no power applied. So, what it is going to affect is your ability to coast. So if you accelerate the aircraft, after adjusting your friction coefficients on the tires, after accelerating the aircraft on the ground and you pull power to idle, the airplane should not immediately stop as if it had no thrust applied. It should slowly coast to a stop, but it's not going to be as fast as if there's nothing coming from the prop, because you've stood behind the Cessna at idle. It does produce some thrust. Not much, but it does produce some. So that's going to help you along.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, so again, as you suggested, I should just put in just some basics here and just get the thing flying as quickly as possible, because this stuff I cannot just make up and or find somewhere in a manual.
Yes, these are not values that are physically based. They're basically coefficients into some internal equation inside of X-Plane.
Gotcha.
And since you're not going to be running the equation on hand, I mean, it's probably isn't even published. It's some coefficient in Austin's equations.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
tune it until it looks right.
Gotcha there. Good advice. And you would also recommend me to start with the engine, then to the weights and balance, and then
first you want to make sure you got your weight and balance, because the airplane's just not going to fly if you're out of balance. You know, if you have your CG
sure.
Behind your CL, it's just going to flip over. First you want to, the good thing about weight and balance is you can get those values from the manual. Those are good.
Yeah,
those
I find
are there.
those as well. Yeah. I've read about those in some manual that I already have. Yeah, right.
That's one of the important things, for instance. So for your reference point, you want to make sure that you have the reference point that you have in PlaneMaker matches the datum point on the reference manuals that you have, because then you can just straight up take those values straight out of the manual and just plug them into PlaneMaker for the position of your airplane's center of gravity, how much it moves with various loads on in the passenger seats, where the fuel center of gravity is, on all of that.
Yeah.
That's going to help you a lot.
A lot more efficient. Yeah.
You don't have to translate basically the numbers if you put your reference point in the same place as the datum.
Yeah, sure. Good one. But then, so I wasn't suggesting that I should first put in engine specs and then load it up and explain and fly and tinker, because obviously I need to set also the control geometry and all of that stuff. But I remember a earlier post of yours today where you were suggesting, well, in PlaneMaker, engine specs first, then the weight and balance, and then the control.
I mean, you basically go through these three and then start flying the aircraft, and that's why I said you're going to be iterating on that. You know, it's just going to be a constant cycle going over those three until you get them to the point where you're satisfied that the airplane flies to the specification, and then you can start worrying about things like electrics and putting the various loads on there and all that stuff. That's going to come later. First of all, you just want to make the thing fly mechanically.
Exactly.
And you were asking about you were asking about the critical altitude value there.
Yeah. I thought it was something about turboprops and why you didn't set it. So, but perhaps I don't get what what's about.
It's not turboprops. It's for turbocharged piston aircraft. So, turbocharged piston aircraft have an inlet compressor that can simulate as if you were at sea level up to some maximum critical value, some maximum critical altitude, above which you will start losing power. Same thing for supercharged engines. On a naturally aspirated engine, it's going to be 0, basically. The engine is rated to run full power at sea level and no higher. A turbocharged engine, this basically gives you the efficiency of the turbocharger, how much additional pressure it can provide. And you can actually calculate that if you have the discharge pressure, your boost pressure, basically, from the turbocharger at 100% RPM. So basically the full power of the turbocharger is doing as much as it can. It'll give you a maximum boost value, say like 6 PSI or something like that. 6 PSI is about 1/3 atmosphere pressure.
Yes.
And you can calculate how much that is in terms of altitude.
Awesome.
So you know how far it can compensate. It's going to take a little bit of fine-tuning if you have a turbocharged engine, but that's basically it. Now, the reason why it's 0 for the TBM and for turboprops in general, it should be 0, is because if you do it right, to be honest, if you do it right, engines like a PT6 are what's called flat rated. So they have 2 values of power. The TBM is 850 horsepower, shaft horsepower max, but that's the limit of the gearbox, not the limit of the engine. The engine can do more, a lot more.
Oh,
the engine, it's called the engine thermodynamic limit, and the thermodynamic limit of the TBM's PT6-66 Model B is 1,825 horsepower. That's what you saw in that screenshot.
I remember.
But it can do that power only at sea level. As soon as you start climbing, that power is going to come down. But since you're still limited by your gearbox, you're still going to be able to extract the maximum 850 horsepower. But as soon as that sort of the thermodynamic rating with altitude drops below 850, that's when you've reached basically your max performance altitude. Above that, it's going to keep on dropping power. Now for the TBM, because it's flat rated to about just 40% of its max power, basically your thermodynamic limit, it's insanely high. It's like flight level 260 is the limit for it to be at full power.
Wow. Yeah.
And so for a naturally aspirated engine, 180 horsepower at critical altitude 0 is going to give you exactly the correct behavior that you want.
Roger. Roger.
If you had a specially designed inlet that would allow a little bit of pressure recovery,
Yep.
you could put that into RAM inlet pressure recovery. But the default 172, the way it came from the factory, is probably not going to give you that.
I totally understand. I understand.
I don't know if you're going to be doing wear modeling or engine performance degradation, but you can actually change the maximum performance value dynamically in X-Plane while it's running. So you could simulate something like a drop in power from the engine, because piston engines are notorious. You know, they'll lose easily 10 to 15% of their power just from running.
Oh, interesting. I have no idea what X-Plane offers me to do those experimentations. Would love to know more about that as well. I guess just a few episodes later, I guess, before I need to set this stuff first here in PlaneMaker. But I guess once I get there, that sounds like a good way to get going. Yeah, because I also was wondering about how you would actually use PlaneMaker in parallel with X-Plane while you are flying and gathering data and then modifying stuff. Do you need to quit X-Plane and then move into PlaneMaker again and then all the way around, or can you run those?
While you want to modify the system, so you don't have you are going to be using PlaneMaker for that if you're developing. So while developing the aircraft, you're going to be running both PlaneMaker and X-Plane at the same time. And the way to do it is if you change a value in PlaneMaker, just save the aircraft, and in X-Plane there's a menu called Developer. Just hit Reload Current Aircraft, and it'll reload the aircraft from the state it was on disk.
Oh man!
And
that's easy.
And you can just continue flying. So
that's great. That's
so
great.
You can when I run X-Plane during development, I reload the airplane probably at least 100 times for each flight.
Yeah.
And that's how you are able to iterate so quickly. You're able to change a setting, reload, fly for 20 seconds,
stuff a lot more
change
efficient.
a setting, reload.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Oh, that gives perspective. Thanks, though, for dropping by. Good advice. You sound so knowledgeable, man. How many aircraft have you already developed in X-Plane then?
None. I'm working on the TBM. That's my first.
Awesome, man. And did you study a lot of stuff on aerodynamics before, or what's your background?
Well, I'm a software engineer by trade, but I have had a reasonable amount of physics in university. So,
yeah, that gives you quite a head start, I presume. Yeah. Well, thanks again for dropping by, man. I'm going to sync this in, and
yeah, sure. If you have questions, feel free to drop me a message over Discord. I can try to help.
Thank you, man. Thanks.
You're welcome. We gotta help each other out.
Yeah, I would love to. Well, and again, I think I will also run. This is also an example where I run into some, knowledge gaps, I guess, with regard to, also how do engines work and that stuff. And I would love to learn more. So by doing these chats, there's that really helps, because otherwise these are just numbers. I'm going to look for stuff that actually I will not find through Google, and I shouldn't find through Google, because I just need to fly and conceptually know what I'm doing. So and this is really helping me to approach it in that way. So thanks again. Awesome.
Cool. You're welcome. Have fun.
Thanks. We'll chat again.
Bye.
Awesome, guys. That's Toe for you. Again, loving the fact that you guys just jump in and help me out. So, also, aside from the entire high idle and low idle stuff and all the stuff that we set in here, it's also interesting now, from at least to me, how to do the test flights, PlaneMaker at one side and X-Plane on the other. So that's also making me curious of, or I was actually quite curious of how aircraft developers like Rush, and I guess also Toe, do that. Because if you need to quit X-Plane and then move to PlaneMaker, change something, and then go back to X-Plane, man, that would take quite some time. But if you can do that on the fly, literally, that would be great. So that's also quite interesting. Thanks. So yeah, guys, I need to quit my stream, unfortunately. I would love to just chat further on and now tinker with what else we need to do still in this menu. But Mrs. Uncertified is waiting, and I'm gonna watch some television and call it a day. I need to sleep again for tomorrow's work. But this gives me some good guides and some pointers on what to look for and what to set already and what I should just leave here and optimize through my test flights. So To, once again, thanks. Hoping to speak to you again soon. Sounds really interesting, the stuff that you're doing. I like to watch streams while I'm working. Yeah, that's actually also how I do it. But thanks again. All right, guys. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to save here. Understood. Yeah. And PlaneMaker stuff that we already saved some additional pages there that we can look or study later on. Maintenance manual's gone and away. So yes. I think one of the next things that we need to do is go to another tab. I mean, we said already enough in that first tab of the engine specs, but there are many more. And perhaps we can also look at, for example, that prop incidence and the all of the different numbers that we could set, the prop geo tab, for example. So I just need to look at those tabs and see what I can already set in terms of numbers and stuff, just to prepare for my first test flight and not focus too much on, frustrate myself too much on getting all the numbers, but just get a rough, yeah, interesting. So let me put that in. Well, meanwhile, I don't really care, but for the next episode, engine specs, complete most of the tabs, most of the fields. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, good. And also, meanwhile, I can just browse a little bit more and finding information that I can use for those tabs. Also, would love to learn a little bit more about engines in general, just to see how they work, especially for this Skyhawk, obviously. Awesome. Alrighty then. Let me see if I can quickly switch. Can I? Why are my shortcuts not working halfway through the stream? There's something weird going on with OBS, I guess. Doesn't really matter that much because I can also use the mouse. Okay, guys. So quick stream after work. Yeah, venturing into the engine specs menu of PlaneMaker, and now running into some completely new and complex topics of how engines work, and also how we should set those numbers, not just by finding them, but again, as Rush also already mentioned, by just get flying and getting some data reps going, some data showing on the screen, flying by the book, and based off of that as a reference, trying to tweak those numbers here in PlaneMaker to make our Skyhawk fly like it should based on those performance tables. And that's the way to go about it. So yeah, further developing on that idea of how important test flying is for making an aircraft in PlaneMaker. Once again, To, thank you for your help. Really much appreciated. Hope to chat with you again very soon. And guys, as always, happy flights and blue skies. I will probably stream not tomorrow evening, I guess, but perhaps Wednesday. We'll have to see, but if you follow me on Twitter or on Discord, I will post my next stream schedule, and you'll be the first to know, and you can jump here in my workshop as soon as I go live. Guys, again, happy flights, blue skies.